Remembrance. Welcome back to Weekly Wisdom. Our final week in the Inevitable series concludes as we have journeyed through the first chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. This week, we will look at verses 10 and 11. And they read, "People may say about something, 'Look at this, it's new.' But it was already around for ages before us. There's no remembrance of things in the past, nor of things to come in the future. Neither will there be any remembrance among those who come along in the future." Remembrance. We live in a time where we have access to historical information, data, testimonies, collections of materials that help to shape our understanding of the world of the past, the world that has given birth to us, the journey that not only we personally, individually have taken, or even our families, but that we can actually journey back in miraculous ways to uncover even the literature of a particular time and the writings of a particular time. So we can delve into understanding of what people meant in expanded ways. An example of this, what I'm talking about, comes in our modern translations of the Bible. So the Bible has been translated into different languages since the Latin Vulgate, which was the Latin translation of the Hebrew text and the Greek text. And they were translated into what was the scholarly language of the Roman Empire, the language of the educated and the scholars, not the common language of the people. A language that was so restricted that today it's not spoken. It's not the spoken language anywhere in the world. Yet it remains, but it remains as this dead language because it's not spoken, and language is supposed to be spoken. That's what gives it life, is hearing it, is speaking it. We remember what's been written down, and that's what's passed on from generation to generation. The Bible, of course, began, all of the books of the Bible, probably with the exception of the letters and some of the New Testament texts, began as oral tradition, oral history that was later transcribed. And even the letters, most people didn't read the letter. They heard the letter being read by a person or persons to a large group of people. So it's the hearing of these words that gave them the original life, and writing them down is what allows us to enter into the memory. But we need to enter into the memory of when they were first heard. Remembrance. So the book of Ecclesiastes, we've mentioned this before, written by someone who was not having a good day, if you will, was in it's so pessimistic in tone. It is resigned. All the language is of despair, of defeat, of giving up. Even the term inevitable reflects a feeling of powerlessness, a loss of agency, a loss of not only control, but participation and influence on one's own life. And so here in this last portion of this passage that we have explored today, the writer's bemoaning that lack of remembrance, that lack of entering into memory in an engaged way. So it's one thing to talk about having memories, but I think of remembrance as calling them back. There's this passive thing that happens when we go about our lives and something in our today clicks with our yesterday, and we are able to make those connections. And so But there's also something that happens when something in our today calls us back to saying, has this happened before? Is this the first time we've experienced this? And a lot of times we look at things and we say, well, this has never happened before. Maybe this particular thing has never happened in this particular way, and certainly not at a particular time. But has something happened in the past that we can draw upon to learn a lesson, to be encouraged, to get a new sense of direction, to see how others have handled similar circumstances in the past? You know, being in an era of pandemic, I'm reminded 100 years ago that the Spanish flu was another pandemic. And as I say Spanish flu, it's like, why our preoccupation with attaching these pandemics to a region of the world is also, I think, in some ways, the ways in which our lack of grace and our need to assign blame is so pervasive in our society and culture and in our world. But this flu of 100 years ago was a pandemic. And I remember talking to some colleagues in the ministry, other churches who had gone back in their records and who had found bulletins from those times, bulletins that weren't used in common worship, but they were mailed to parishioners so that they could worship at home. And I remember hearing that so early on in the pandemic that it just gave me this sense of gratitude that no, we've gone through this. Humanity has gone through this before in the not too distant past, and found ways in which to respond that are not that dissimilar in that they use the technology that they had, the ability to mass produce, or even, small batches, individual churches, to produce bulletins and to mail them or to distribute them however they did to the members of the church, so that there was still a connection, there was still a certain commonality in worship. And so I think that this bemoaning is also at the same time an encouragement to say, when we're looking at the circumstances that we hear all the time, this has never happened before, these are unprecedented times. There aren't really unprecedented times. And the more we say that and the more we think about that, the more we lose out on the ability to tap into the reservoir of our common history for the lessons and encouragement and the direction that they bring. I found that tremendously encouraging throughout the time when had to very quickly develop a new way of ministering during pandemic to be safe, but to try to maintain connections, even as we were distancing from one another. That it wasn't the first time that it happened. And the people from 100 years ago got through it, moved past it, and so could we. And so maybe what the author is saying here, maybe why the writer was so discouraged, was because the writer maybe had a memory or wanted to engage in a conversation. Let's look for lessons from our past. Let's look for encouragement from our past. Let's look for direction from our past, not to stay in it, because that's what I find today, is that people today want to, so often, not everywhere, I don't want to make this a blanket statement, but I do find myself often having conversations with people who want to bring very specific past solutions to current problems, which is a source of frustration to me that I have to name and own. I want to look to the past, again, for encouragement and for some sense of direction. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those things that were are the things that we'll do now. So going back to my example, we didn't, I mean, we did mail some bulletins, but we actually streamlined our order of worship, and we made our order of worship available, our bulletin, if you will, into a PDF document that we uploaded to our website and that we put links to in the comment section of Facebook. And for those who were streaming live, because most of the folks who streamed live with us were on Facebook, we put on a PowerPoint presentation that we shared the screen and projected, and we're still doing that. So we took the same essence, the same spirit of that. So, okay, we have to worship. So what did they do? The solution wasn't they sent bulletins, so that's the only solution. The solution was they found a way to get people to help facilitate people worshiping from their homes on a weekly basis in a common way. And we did that too. So there's a broad, what was their solution? And then there's a very specific thing. And I think when we say there's this is new, we do need new ways to achieve old ends, right? Enduring ends. The sense of community is needed whether we are inside a building or outside, or more than likely in this day and this age, doing a combination of the two. But when we go back and we look, and we can translate that into so many aspects of our lives. We look at the political unrest in this country. We look at the rise of authoritarianism in this country. People say we've never been this divided. We had a civil war. This country was founded out of revolution, planted by stealing lands from people, millions of people who were already living here on lands in their own societies that were quite civilized, advanced, and developed. And by stealing human beings from another land and bringing them and transporting them across an ocean into a hostile environment, we've been divided before. And if we don't want to look to our own example, we could look at the rise of authoritarianism around the world, particularly in Nazi Germany. The parallels are stunning and frightening. But it's not inevitable. Because what's the undercurrent in all of these things that the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying? It's not the things that happen, it's our response to them. And that's the difference. If we don't believe it's inevitable, then it won't be. If we're willing to be part of the change that's needed, part of looking at things in a new way for a new day, and standing up for truth, and standing up for the good news of Jesus Christ, and all of that for the marginalized, the least of these, of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, the reign of God and God's love on earth, and a dismantling of every system that goes against the dignity and worth and value of every human being, and that threatens creation each and every day. And of course, our sibling creation, indigenous people on these lands, and I'm speaking to a land that was the land of the Erie people, the Erie Nation, and their view of creation as a sibling is one that's just become more and more appealing and compelling to me and convicting to me. We have obligations to this land and to creation. And that's what dominion really means. Not authority, not in the way that we mean authority often in Western cultures and in Eurocentric cultures. But care and responsibility as co-inhabitants of this planet, because you know what's resilient? The planet. But we seem to do everything in our power to destroy everything we can that lives on it, either through overconsumption or misappropriation or just neglect. I'm not like the writer of Ecclesiastes. I am cautious and I am concerned, but I'm not pessimistic. And even when I have moments of despairing and discouragement, and I do, I confront them with the belief that God is still with us. And for me, that really is the only thing that truly is inevitable. That God is still with us, God is still empowering us, and God is still moving amongst us, and God is still speaking to us, and God is still making ways out of no way. God is still. And because God is, we can do all the necessary things that we need to do to participate fully, actively, and engaged in the restoration project of Jesus Christ and the ministry of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that is not necessarily all about telling people that they've been wrong and ways to be right, but it is about loving people and embodying that love, loving people with our whole selves, sacrificially, beyond reason or expectation. As we are heading into Advent, many of you will see this, it'll already be Advent by the time you see this. God is with us. And God, there at the beginning, God now, God in the future. Let's remember that. The one who was, the one who is, and the one who is to come is inevitable. And because of that inevitability, all possibilities are made possible. And that's good news. Thank you for joining me for another weekly wisdom. I'm Pastor Cheryl. Thank you for joining me on this series. We've got another one coming up for Advent. You'll see that. Stay tuned to the channel. If you want to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you will not miss a video. If you like this video, I would love to hear your comments, or even just click like to let me know that this is the type of content you would like to continue to see. Until the next time on this journey, love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself.